And again, that's very interesting how, see, the important thing that we also therefore need to understand is the system of caste is able to maintain itself by creating, in that sense, complicity of upper caste women to this entire system, right? So, very interestingly, what you have is, a structure by which, I'm sorry, uh, a structure by which women, upper caste women, therefore enter into a certain kind of caste class gender bargain with, the men of their own, because they are given power in return of this bargain, right? They are given a certain kind of power in return of this bargain over others, now, whether it is lower caste women or quote unquote lower caste men. And therefore you have a coding of a certain kind of gendered ideology, of how do you then maintain this how do you actually get this complicity, how do you manage this complicity, right? And this, the ideological tools for, sort of managing this complicity, come to us through the ideology of, what Umachakravati calls the Stri Swabhava and the Stri Dharma, right, where women are, and again this is coming to us from Manu, where women are then coded, their essential nature is coded as being fickle, and women are coded as being weak and capricious, cunning, etc. And they are being told that, this is your essential nature, this is Stri Swabhava, right? That women by nature are capricious, they are by nature, fickle, chanchal, incapable in that sense of, any real spiritual growth. And the only way in which you can, in any real sense, achieve, some kind of spiritual mobility, is by following the Stri Dharma. And what is the Stri Dharma? The Stri Dharma then gets coded in terms of Pativrata, right? And complete devotion to the husband, etc., etc., which also codes in the notion of the husband as an endogamous being, right, as someone who has been, found for you within, in that sense, the caste group. Now if you follow, in that sense, the the rules and norms laid down for you by the caste society, as an upper caste woman, then you have access to a certain level of resources and power, resources and power necessarily over those who are lower to you. Of course, that resources and power is not something that you get then over the men of your own caste group. This is necessarily, against or over, in that sense, men and women of, who are lower to you. But your complicity is there, and so it's important for us to remember that women also, and that's again something to understand, that the femininity of women is constructed differently on, in that sense, the hierarchy of caste, right? And that women, especially women coming from the upper caste, are complicit in many ways with the structure of caste and gender, because being complicit and, sort of obeying, so to say, the rules of the game, is how they get access now. So it's their bargain with Brahminical patriarchy, the complicity, and therefore, agreeing to, in that sense, the rules of Brahminical patriarchy, is how upper caste women also then get certain power and resources over those who are seen to be lower. And Sri Swabhava Sri Dharma then becomes the ideological sort of complex, that marks or, no, that sort of shapes that whole idea. The third important structure that I want to talk about, that tells us the ways in which gender and caste intersections are the, I mean, you cannot talk about it one without the other, is the fact also that patriarchy does not oppress all women equally, right? So what is crucial for us to understand also is the fact that you have actually differential patriarchal practices. There's a diversity of patriarchal practices, right? And this diversity actually of patriarchal practices is what allows also for the hierarchy of caste to exist and be reproduced. Okay, what do I mean by this? So, like I was saying, for instance, and that's very important for us to know, the way in which the woman question in India comes to be framed in colonial India is actually entirely the problems only in that sense of, upper caste women. Women from other castes are not forbidden from, widow remarriage. Women from other castes are not going sati, so on and so forth, right? So you have a sense by which you will always have, just like Angela Davis says in the context of race, you have actually differential, patriarchal practices for women of different groups. Because the women of different groups, different caste groups, are not oppressed in the same way, therefore the rules of, endogamy, of purity, etc., are not the same for them. They are not the same irrespective of caste. Uh, am I Have I lost you all?
You were breaking up a little bit before, but now it's fine.
Okay, all right. So I'm saying basically that this diversity of patriarchal practices is actually what constructs the hierarchy of caste. Okay, and I'll give you a concrete example. This is of course colonial India, but we talk about it. So you have a very interesting, interesting story actually of the goldsmiths, the sonars of Maharashtra, who go to the Peshwas. Okay, and they go to the Peshwas and they say, listen, we our women, when they're widowed, they don't remarry. Our women are going sati. We have child marriage well before puberty. Our girls are married off. We are following all the practices of Brahmin women, and therefore we should be given the right to read the Vedas. The Peshwa state, and this is a Brahminical state, we would think that they would be very happy to see that, women are, they are not really, they are maintaining celibacy in widowhood, or they are going sati. One would think that the Peshwa state would be very happy, to hear this. But what you have the Peshwas actually tell the Sonars is, they say that you must not do this. Your women should not, they should remarry if they are widowed. They should not go sati. And what is all this nonsense? You should not be following these practices. You must follow the practices of your own caste, right? And why is this? Because in many ways the distinctive diversity of gender practices, of gendered patriarchies, becomes a way then of saying why the hierarchy of caste is justified, right? It's almost like saying, oh, our women are purer than yours, and our women, maintain in that sense, their sexual purity is maintained, their sexual purity is not under question. Because also, so if you see again, somebody had put up a thing about, the control in the Nambutiri community, for instance. And you will see this across, Brahmin communities, through the history of Brahmin communities across India. You will see this, that the control over women's sexuality in terms of women's mobility, these are all caste groups which will say our women don't go out, our women are not, they don't work in the fields, they don't step outside without, whatever, a male accompanying them, etc., etc. Because as long as you can ensure that women are not, they don't have social mobility, as long as you can ensure that women are never outside of the surveillance of the kinship and community, you can claim that our women are sexually pure, right? But then the system of caste structurally, institutionally ensures that women of certain caste groups are necessarily out in the public for work, etc., etc., always therefore leaving space to cast aspersions on their sexual purity, and therefore on, in that sense, the integrity of their castes, right? So that's differential patriarchal rules. So patriarchy does not oppress all women in the same way. It is not interested in oppressing all women in the same way, because if patriarchal rules become uniform across caste groups, or would have become uniform across caste groups, then the very justification for the hierarchy of caste collapses. So gender norms, differential gender norms, what we allow our women to do and not do, then becomes the way in which the system of caste is coded, right? So diversity of patriarchal practices, and this therefore this notion of graded patriarchies, right? So you will have, for instance, so the Nambutri women, marry only once, and they only marry, in that sense, men from their own communities. But then you have all of these, institutionalized systems like sambandhams, now, where the Nair woman, marries in that sense a Nambutri man, but that the sambandham always remains in that sense seen as something that is lower than marriage, no? than intercaste, whatever marriage, right? Or now, for instance, we'll see this whole question of remarriage, right? So widows, only upper caste widows are denied remarriage. In fact, all other ladies laboring caste women, there are customary and ritualized practices of remarriage, right? And this sort of graded patriarchies, this diversity then of patriarchal practices, also allows then for certain women to be marked as those who are accessible sexually for upper caste men, right? So you have practices, for instance, like the Devadasi, where this is an institutionalized, where religion and caste comes together to create a context within which there is a ritualized access to the body and sexuality of the lower caste woman for the upper caste man, right? And that itself, right, and the fact that these women come from certain castes then becomes the justification for why their castes are lower down, right? So hierarchies of gender and hierarchies of castes are entirely, in that sense, built up on each other, right? That the gradation of, and so endogamy, the graded patriarchies, the diversity in that sense of patriarchal practices, and this idea of marriage and caste, women as, in that sense, the gateways to the mobility of caste, become the ways in which you cannot actually think of caste and gender as outside of each other, because these are systems that co-constitute each other. You cannot have in any meaningful sense a system of gender which does not account for the hierarchy of caste, and vice versa. Okay. uh, we have, what about, we're already at 6:40. Should we, should I stop here and should we take questions, or should I take up like one example and talk about that and then open it up for questions? I mean, if the organizers can sort of come in on that.
I don't think there's a problem with giving an example since we haven't done one yet. So yeah, you can go ahead and give one example.
Okay, great. All right, great. So I just wanted to quickly talk about the question of sexual violence, in this context, and how, this argument that I'm making about gender and caste being the intersections. Yeah, so yeah, sure. I'm going to give you an example. And these intersections of caste and gender, how they might entirely reorient our understanding. And so I want to, let me just quickly talk about the question of sexual violence, and I hope that it will help us think through some of these questions, right? Now, the idea is that what I'm trying to say, so again, when we think of sexual violence, we often think of the question of patriarchy. We often think about men and women, and men as powerful, women as vulnerable, and the question of sexual violence is a question of gender-based violence, right? We often we think about it like that. I'm arguing, and I'm drawing actually from the work of many feminists, Kalpana Kanabiran, and many others, and also actually from the work of Angela Davis in the context of race. My argument is that what gets constructed as sexual violence itself is actually constructed by the relative caste positions of the people involved. Okay. And I'll tell you what I mean by this, right? So I'm saying that, like I was saying, within a context of a caste-based society like India, practices of gender are essentially shaped through that, okay? Where what is prohibited, therefore, is the access to the bodies of upper caste women by lower caste men, whereas access to the body and sexuality of the lower caste woman by the upper caste man is actually seen as routinized and life as usual, so to say, right? Now, within this sort of a context, and Kalpana Kanabiran talks about it in a very interesting way. She says that if you actually, and she looks at actually rape trials, and what courts have had to say in rape trials. She says that if you actually look at the cases of rape and what, I will put down the names. Let me just finish the argument. I'll put down the names. She says that if you actually look at these, you look at these cases, and you actually look at what judges are saying, she says the judicial discourse actually constructs categories of rapeable and unrapeable women. Okay, and when we are saying rapeable and unrapeable women, I mean, we don't mean, when we are saying rapeable women, we don't mean women who can be raped, but basically women who are constructed in a way, whose sexuality is constructed in a way in which it is seen to be something that could have been violated. Okay. Whereas unrapeable women, she argues, are actually categories of women who are constructed in a way in which, so it's not that they are unrapeable because rape didn't happen, but that the act that they have had to face is not constructed as rape within the judicial discourse, because these women are seen to, that the femininity of these women, the sexuality of these women is constructed in a way in which it is seen therefore as something that, I mean, that there's nothing that they could have lost, and therefore they could not have been raped. Okay, let me give you a concrete example of what I mean by this. If we look at the judgment of the Rajasthan High Court, this is in a case, this is Bhavri Devi's case. Right. So Bhavri Devi, are you all familiar with the case? She was a Sathin, someone who worked with the Women's Development Program of the Rajasthan state government. One of the things that she was asked to do as part of her job was to stop child marriages in her village. There was a child marriage happening in an upper caste home. Yes, she's also, yeah, that's the case through which we get the Vishakha guidelines. So she tries to stop stop this child marriage happening in an upper caste home in her village. And the men of the family, very angered by her, by how a lower caste woman could do this, gang rape her. We have the Vishakha guidelines on sexual harassment at the workplace, and Bhavri Devi's case was actually the basis of that. But unfortunately, her case is the criminal case of rape is still pending. Right, and that tells us something about what we are saying about rapeable and unrapeable women. Anyway, the Rajasthan High Court gives this judgment, right, and it acquits all 4 men accused of raping Bhavri. And these are the reasons that the court gives on record. You can go and check out, the transcript of the judgment. One, they say, of course, that India is a peace-loving country, and so things like this don't happen here. But even more importantly, they say that in our country we have a caste system where we don't even take water from the hands of the lower caste. So the question that these upper caste men touched the body of this woman is out of question. So they could not have raped her. And third, they say that 2 of the accused were like uncle and nephew. So they said, because they are related to each other in a country like ours with our culture, it is unthinkable that they must have, an uncle and nephew will have sexual relations with the same woman. Therefore, the rape could not have happened. Right. The point, therefore, that I'm trying to make is the way in which the body of the lower caste woman is constructed. It is already, so you're already constructing this as something, as an unrapeable body, because what happens with that body is actually seen as routine, right? It is actually seen as something that is part of, in that sense, the routinized access of upper caste men to the bodies of lower caste women, and not as rape, right? Whereas when something, when it is a case of hypo, yeah, in the sense that when it is a case of a lower caste, and so if you look at all of these examples, right, you look at all the recent examples of sexual violence which have really hit the headlines. And please don't get me wrong, I have nothing against the questions, because sexual violence is an important issue. But if you just take for instance what happens with now the Jyoti Kumari case, now what comes to be called the Nirbhaya case. Now, of course, there's a huge uproar about it. But what many Dalit feminists have pointed out is that, for the, in the months just preceding this incident in December, in the, from actually August to September, October of the same year, in neighboring Haryana, not like even 100 kilometers from Delhi, there were at least 9 different cases of rape on minor Dalit girls by upper caste men, and none of these actually caught the attention of anyone. These were not really seen as they didn't really touch the conscience of the nation, etc., etc. Now the point is not therefore to say that, oh, it's not what about, it's not to say, oh, but then what, if people didn't say anything about it, should they not have said anything about this? That's not the point. The point is, if you look at the discourse that gets constructed around it, it has, and the judgments that come out and the punishments that get meted out, etc., etc., it has much to do with the relative social positions of the survivor of rape and the perpetrators of rape, right? And that's not so. My point, therefore, and the argument, therefore, that we're making is that caste in many ways determines the categories of who are rapeable and unrapeable women. I mean, I don't have the time right now to go into it. You should go and read, Ramizabi's case, and it's available on public record. I mean, because Ramizabi, it's a case of custodial rape. A policeman take her to a police station. They, beat up her husband till a point that he dies, and rape Ramiza in the precincts of the police station. And the entire case is about proving how Ramiza B is a prostitute. And therefore, and so the question is, oh, because she's a prostitute, her sexuality gets constructed in a way in which she could not therefore have been raped, because what does a prostitute have to lose? Because the entire construction of rape is also not as a question of sexual autonomy, it is as a question of modesty, izzat, and honor, right? And so caste becomes central to the way in which you constitute the very crime of rape, because who is then constructed as the woman who has honor, izzat, modesty, is very much therefore coded through the intersections of caste, right? And in that sense, therefore, we see that the very nature, therefore, of sorry, let me just this is all chat. Absolutely. I mean, Nikita, no, you're right. I mean, you are right. In fact, that is how it should be. But like I said, the very construction of the question of rape is done in that sort of a way, right? Where now so because access to the bodies of lower caste women, and so is seen as routine, because it comes coded through us through the system of caste, right? Where in that sense, for the upper caste man to have access to the body and sexuality of the lower caste woman is something that has been sort of been coded as the normative. And so it's the other way around, right? So again, I'm not I don't have a problem with the fact that, for instance, whatever, no, in the Shakti Mill rape case, or in what has come to be called the Nirbhaya case, perpetrators were given strict punishment. I have absolutely no problem with that. But I'm also saying that part of how strict that punishment was, and how disturbing those incidents of rape were for us and for the public discourse, has to do with the fact that these perpetrators are also lower class migrant, in the case of Shakti Mill rape case, minority men, right? Whereas the perpetrators in the Haryana cases, in the Bhavri Devi case, in the Ramiza B case, are powerful people. Are people who are in that sense socially powerful, and these are men who are so it's not so the point that I'm trying to make is that the question of sexual violence is not about a social group called men and a social group called women. In the Indian context, rape is constituted necessarily through the intersections of caste and gender. And in fact, Angela Davis makes a very interesting argument, similar argument, about actually race and gender in the American context. And she calls it the twin myth of rape, right? So she says, for instance, that if you look at, and again she's looking at judgments that have come in rape cases. She shows us, for instance, how so she says there's this twin myth about black men and women. One myth is that the black man is in that sense the black man is the aggressive, violent, rapist, a potential rapist at all times. And the other myth is, these are myths. The other myth is the black woman is available, loose, etc. And she says that if you actually look at the cases of rape, she says you can literally map, in that sense, the race of the perpetrator, the race of the survivor, and see whether acquittal happens or punishment is given, right? So she says, for instance, how if it's a black man raping a white woman, almost always you will have punishment. If it's a white man raping a black woman, almost always you get acquittals. She says if it's a white man and a white woman, it's often about class. It's often about whether this woman is seen to be the property of some. So if she's a property of a rich man, then you will see conviction. If she's seen as the property of a poor man, you will see acquittal. And then she says, what if it's a black on, if it's a rape by a black man on a black woman? She says, then it really is about which of the two myths the judge believes more. If he believes the myth of the black man as the potential aggressive rapist, then there will be conviction. If he believes more the myth of the black woman as loose and sexually morally sexually available, then it will result in an acquittal, right? So the very notion, the very idea of what act constitutes rape is constructed actually through the intersections of race and gender, in that context. I'm saying that it's constructed actually through the intersections of caste and gender, because categories like rapeable and unrapeable women are constructed through notions of women who are seen to have honor, women who are seen to have modesty, and that is linked to the way in which the system of caste constructs femininities of women from different castes differentially. Okay.